Um, I have three adopted sisters that are biracial. So anytime we go anywhere, I have my white siblings and I have my black siblings. We will get looks from people, and you can tell, that they're looking at us trying to figure out where they came from. When really it doesn't matter, but you can tell it's an issue.
And how does that make you feel?
I don't like it because a person is a person. I don't believe in color. I believe in one race, and that's human.
Okay. What would you say to somebody who doesn't think racism is a problem here?
Most likely, they don't think it's a problem because they are the problem.
All right. Thank you.
Go. Okay. Oh, it's not like prompted. All right, heard. So, right now we're in Greene County. There is, I think, an issue with racism in Greene County purely because we don't have a high population of, Latino folks. There's a lot of African Americans. The people who are here have been here a long time. So they kind of have almost like a unpleasant reputation just by their family name. See, I feel like you get a lot of that. We're fortunate that we have a college that has a large draw of African American students, but I think where they're from, big cities, Atlanta, and places in South Carolina, North Carolina, they're from much larger places. They have a different perspective and they act differently than the folks who live in Greene County. So there's sometimes tension, I think, just from that kind of perspective. But when I was 15, we moved from Memphis. I lived in inner city Memphis, and it was a whole other ballgame. If you lived downtown and you were white, you were the minority. So I was the only white kid in my 10th grade honors English class. And I don't know, when you're little, you don't really notice it as much, so it's hard to say what it's like now as an adult to live in Memphis and be black. But there's always that stigma. If you live in the hood, if you're, from a project, you gotta fight for what you can get. And in the upperly mobile, just ignore your existence completely.
So I grew up in New Jersey, and the town that I grew up was like a suburb, and racism was actually pretty dominant in our area too. I grew up in schools where there was only white kids, and one year we had two black kids come into the school at the same time, and everybody just assumed they were siblings because they were both of color, unfortunately. And the kids got picked on severely that they wound up both moving and not coming back the following year. But ever since, right before I left New Jersey to move to Tennessee, the racism actually got better. More and more blacks started to move, and more of other colors and things like that and races started to move into our area. And people started to become more welcoming to them. It just kind of changed over time. I think with the younger generations rising up and just seeing, having friends of different ethnicities and races, it was just helpful to have them come in. So
I don't think racism is such a problem in this area. I think it's more or less ignorance. And basically, since they don't see a lot of Hispanic people, or, well, I'll just talk for Hispanic people in general. There's, that old saying, they'll say, "Do you speak Mexican?" or something like that, where it's not really racist. However, it can be perceived that way. It's just ignorance, and speaking Mexican is a regular term down here, as I've heard. And they go straight to, "Are you Mexican?" If you're red hair, I don't go instead and say, "Are you Irish?" I don't. That's not what I say. So I think I don't think they're trying to be harmful about it. It's just more or less, I don't know. I don't know if it's there's just a lack of understanding about how maybe somebody may perceive that. So just a little bit of just ignorance.
So do you think racism is an issue in the Greene County, Tennessee area?
Not as bad as it is elsewhere, but somewhat, yes.
In what ways have you seen it been an issue?
Well, I mean, it's predominantly white around here, so you do see some racism toward blacks, but it's predominantly white around here, so you do see some racism towards blacks, but you also see it from blacks to whites if you go down the wrong street, perhaps.
What would you say to somebody who does not think racism is a problem here?
I would say they need to open their eyes and look around. It's everywhere.
What do you think the biggest instigator of racial issues is?
The left. Groups like Black Lives Matter and Antifa, things of that nature, they do nothing but put fuel on the fire of racism.
Can you say a little bit more about that?
It's just all propaganda, I think. Not saying that black lives don't matter, but I'm going to say that nobody's lives matter more than anybody else's. Your life's not more important than mine. My life's not more important than yours, regardless of skin color.
Okay.
Yes, I do think that racism is a problem where I grew up, which is in Muskegon, Michigan, on the west side of Michigan. So Muskegon's interesting because I think when you think of Michigan, you think of like Detroit, Flint, and all those places, but Muskegon is actually statistically more segregated than a lot of places in Michigan. So the county of Muskegon is split into a few different parts, and you have like the town where I grew up, which I want to say is like 90% white, and that's about maybe 20 square miles of town, and then you have about 3 or 4 square miles, which is Muskegon Heights, and that area is much more concentrated with people, and it's actually 80% African American. So in the same way that those areas are like racially segregated, you also see a huge difference in the amount of income that people make. So there's a lot of racial tension, I would say. Not that people are like going to be like outright racist and like angry toward each other, but there's always been that divide there. So I think growing up for me, it was just always really interesting because that was just like the way that we knew it to be. So my high school, for instance, had like 1,200 students. So in my class of like 300 kids, we had maybe 10 African American kids, whereas down the road, 2 miles at the Muskegon Heights High School, they had like no white kids. So to me, that's just really interesting, especially, I guess, moving away from there to realize that other places are not like that, and just the way that you grow up, I guess, like, you know, with your parents saying like, no, you can't go to those areas because they're more dangerous, things like that. I don't know.
All right, thank you.
I do think that racism is. I do think that racism is a problem in East Tennessee. I just told Billy, it's crazy, but black animals are like usually the last ones to go home from the shelter because black is superstitiously just like bad and an evil color. And so they stay in the shelter a lot longer. I don't want to just talk about animals, but one thing I've noticed where I work in the nursing home is that in the almost 3 years I've been there, we've had like maybe 1 or 2 patients that were black. And the one time we did have a patient that was black, she felt like she didn't get the care that she needed. She blamed it on being black. I'm not sure if that was the reason or not, but that's how she felt. And then we have had 1 or 2 CNAs that were black, and I know that there was multiple white patients who have said like comments about her. She was a really good CNA, but they would say just things that were degrading, like on purpose or even not on purpose. Like they'd say things like, oh, she's pretty nice for a black girl, things like that. And so that's definitely a problem. I mean, I'm around a lot of older people at my job, but being in that setting, I hear a lot of racist comments. So that's just kind of what I'm around a lot. I guess I have more to say about that, since that's where I am a lot, and I'm maybe not as much around people of my age. But I think it's definitely an issue for people of that generation. I've heard my grandparents say pretty racist things too. So yeah.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
All right. I think racism is a huge problem, specifically in this country. I think it's a disease, and I think some people are carriers of the disease and don't even know it. They don't even know they're infected. I think it impacts all races. Historically in this country, I think because there has been a viewpoint of nationalism that, this exclusivity with one group over another, and it was constitutionally that way. Moving from that, it's going to take time to get over, people's sensitivities and their distortions and perceptions about race. I don't subscribe to the notion that we're all the same color and all of that kind of stuff. I believe that diversity should be celebrated. There's nothing wrong with being unique. I think some of the ways that we're impacted by racism is now there's so much sensitivity towards it that we're finding ourselves, the people are fighting among themselves, and the leadership fuels that kind of animosity between the races. The media has its role in it as well. It's just very hard to, you have to be able to break away and be an independent thinker and do all of the hard work to sort of counter that disease. It's like a kryptonite, if you will, that infects all of us in different ways.
Okay. What would you say is one of the most helpful things we can do to confront racism in our own lives?
Okay. Well, as I said, I think the biggest thing is education, self-knowledge, and not just knowledge about your own culture, your ethnicity, and your cultural heritage, but knowledge of others, being aware of other people's cultures. For example, the Appalachian culture, which I didn't know a lot about until I moved to Tennessee, and then once I found out about it, I said, man, it's interesting how the characteristics of the people of Appalachia historically are consistent with urban environments up north. It's the same things, some of the religious symbols, the matriarch in the family, the music, everything that comes from it. And these two people are so similar, but on the surface, these people will probably be the most hostile towards one another. So basic education is always first and foremost, and then not being able to, and be a skeptic, challenge everything. I don't care what it is, religion, your beliefs. If you want to refine your beliefs and you want to be secure in them, you have got to question them so that beyond a shadow of a doubt that you're standing on solid ground, and that your belief is essentially a self-evident truth, that it doesn't require, any proof beyond that because you've done the research on it. So definitely education. And then, of course, when you see it, saying something about it.
Awesome. Thank you very much for your time.
All right.
Okay, I'm from a small town in South Carolina called New Zion, and racism is pretty bad there. It's probably 60% black, 40% white. It's pretty uncommon to have mixed couples and stuff like that. So one of my closest friends, her daughter has a mixed child, and her family completely pulled away from them, and they were never supportive. And her granddaughter is 10 now, and she hardly ever sees her grandparents. My best friend has been shunned from her parents and church and everything else because she has a mixed grandchild. It's disgusting.